Hey guys, welcome to the Ramsey Paul Show. It is Monday, August 11th, and thank you again for being here. We go over the top 5 news stories of the day, and typically in the morning, I prepare all my 5 stories, and I did that. And then I have a new number 1 story. It just broke a little bit ago, although the signs have been building up. Let me show you right here. And this is just in time. We're getting to the summit meeting this Friday. Russian breakthrough has been confirmed, and this has been confirmed by both the Russians and the Ukrainians. And they have broken through the lines, and basically they don't have any resistance whatsoever. And for those of you that aren't into like war or tactics, I get it. It can be boring for some people. And it's been a long war of 3 years, mostly of attrition. But the problem has been the media has lied to the West during the entire war. Like, oh, the Russians are losing 6 million men a day and they're just primitive. They have to fight with shovels and all of their generals are corrupt and they're all dead and, all the propaganda. It didn't make any sense, because if that was the case, then why does Ukraine need our help if Russia is so weak? But see, that's not the case. Russia is actually a very strong army. They're a strong country. They're not just a gas station with nukes. They actually produce a lot. They have more production than we do as the United States. They can produce a lot of artillery shells, drones. Their technology, I would say, is comparable to the United States. The idea that we're so advanced over everyone else is no longer true. And we can get into the reasons why, probably because of DEI and other stuff, but we become complacent. So it's all been a lot of lies. Now, it's been a very difficult war, a very bloody war on both sides. There's no doubt about it. And Russia's been fighting a grinding war of attrition, very similar to World War I. We haven't seen a war like this in almost 100 years. Even World War II was kind of a lot of breakthroughs, a lot of movement. But this war, I think because of drones, fundamentally changed the tactics. And it's been a trench warfare, and it's been a very slow time of it. But Russia has been advancing. Ukraine has made a lot of stupid decisions. Like last year, they invaded Kursk, a region of Russia. It was just purely for PR purposes. It had no military value. And that's another problem I'm going to talk about. But Zelensky has dictated much of this war on a tactical level. And it's always a mistake when the leader who doesn't have military knowledge starts to determine where to put troops and where to attack and so forth. But Zelensky does this, and he has done this for PR reasons. He wants to look good, even though it doesn't make sense. And it's cost Ukraine a dreadful cost and losing a lot of men. They've held on to cities too long when they should have retreated, and that the whole garrison was destroyed or captured. And it's been repeated over and over why they try to do the spin to the West that, oh yeah, they're just doing wonderful. They're just kicking Russia's ass, the usual stuff. And it's not been the case. They've been lying to you. Russia has been grinding away Ukraine. And what always was seen, what happens in attritional warfare, everything seems to go slow until at the very end, it just breaks apart. And we could be at that situation now with Ukraine. It may be too early to say, but in the last couple of days, and I follow this every day on the battlefields, what's really happening, Russia's been progressing quite rapidly. And it looks like what has happened, Russia has moved their men in a gap, and the Ukrainian army in the front line folded, or they didn't have enough men to hold it, the line. At that time, what you need to do is to bring in your reserves as an army. So if part of your line starts to break, you have reserves in the back and you plug up the line. But the problem is what if you've already used your reserves? And in many cases, that is what Zelensky has done. So it looks at this point, and we'll see if this is actually happening. But again, it's the Ukrainians are panicking on their Telegram channels. Russians are saying this is real. It looks like the Russians have broke through the lines and the Ukrainians don't have any reserves to stop them. And it doesn't mean that Russia has won the war or Kiev is going to fall tomorrow, but this is a catastrophic potential problem for Ukraine where they could quickly lose all of the Donbass now. Or even a worse scenario, their troops could get cut off from supply and you could see mass surrenders. And Ukraine could basically lose their army, which would have political ramifications. Zelensky would probably have to pack up his bags, his US dollars, get in his private plane and head to Tel Aviv. That's a likely scenario. So we're reaching a critical point now in this war. Right before, because today's Monday and Friday, they're supposed to have the summit meeting with Putin and Trump. And the Europeans and Zelensky, they're delusional. They keep saying, we won't negotiate anything. Russia's got to give everything back. Basically, they're calling for Russian surrender, which is just ridiculous. It'd be like in 1945, Hitler calling for Stalin to surrender. It doesn't make any sense. Russia is winning. Looks like they have a big breakthrough now. And this is catastrophic potentially for the Ukrainians. So at this point, they may not be much to negotiate because Putin could walk in and say, we have the Donbass already. There's no need to negotiate over this at this point. We got it. What are you going to do about it? And we as the United States, we really can't do a lot about it. As I said in many shows, despite the propaganda of the United States, we do not have the weapon inventory. We've outsourced a lot of our production. We're involved with our best little friend and their massacres in the Middle East. And we worried about China. And there's no will for us American boys to die for the Donbass. So it looks like a critical situation, and this should be an interesting time. The Europeans and Zelensky should be hopeful that Trump can get anything out of this deal, meaning, okay, Russia, you got the Donbass, stay in the Donbass, recognize the rest of Ukraine as Ukrainian. Those were your original objectives. That would be the best case scenario. And if the Europeans and the Ukrainians are stupid enough to reject that, there's a good chance, and it's hard to tell with Trump, but based on what J.D. Vance said, Trump may throw up his hands and say, well, then it's up to you, Ukraine and Europe. Have fun. You and your girl bosses and your Muslim immigrants, maybe they can go fight against the Russians because it's collapsing. And it could be the entire part of Ukraine could be folded again into Russia like it was in the Soviet Union. So it may all be gone. So it's going to be really interesting this Friday because Trump has a lot of pressure on him from the Europeans and Zelensky, basically not to negotiate in good faith. They're trying to sabotage the negotiations. But at this point, I don't think Putin cares because they're winning on the battlefield. They don't really need to negotiate at this point. If you're winning militarily, you don't have to negotiate. And so the United States is going to be in a really bad position, and Ukraine should probably shut up and hope to get what they get at this point because it's a critical situation. So that's the number one story that just happened like a half hour ago, an hour ago, confirmation that at least on one of the fronts in the Donbass region, the Russians broke through, and then it appears there's no Ukrainian reserves to counter them. And if you know anything about military tactics, that's a disaster because then you have a problem. So Ukraine has a problem. It kind of reminds me of that famous scene. Remember Hitler in the bunker at the very end? You guys probably see that, the angry Hitler. And he's calling for his troops to plug the gap. And they're like, yeah, that doesn't exist. And so the Ukrainians could be in this position because they're running out of men. They just don't have enough men to really stop the Russians. And despite the propaganda, we heard like 90% of the Russian army was destroyed. It's a lie. The Russian army now is bigger than it was at the start of the war. So you've been fed a lot of lies by the usual suspects. And the dangerous part is a lot of politicians and European politicians have believed the lies. And that's dangerous when you start to hear information about the battlefield that is not true, and you base your policies upon that. So that's the number one story that's happening right now. Is it looks like Ukraine is collapsing, or at least the front line in the Donbass. The Russians have broken through based on both the Ukrainians and Russian accounts, and it doesn't look like there's any reserves to stop it. So that's, as you said, that's a big issue. All right. The number two story that I was going to make the number one story before the news broke, but this is a huge story. Trump has announced Washington, D.C. will be liberated today. Crime, savagery, filth, and scum will disappear. I will make our capital great again. The days of ruthless killing or hurting innocent people are over. I fixed the border. 0 illegals in the last 3 months. DC is next. Thank you for this attention in this matter. And the media, I saw MSNBC's been showing their fake crime stats. And again, I showed you a story earlier this week that the police chief was busted. They were faking the numbers. People in DC, they know crime is high despite the lies of the statistics they're putting out. It's a horrid situation. And it's a tricky situation that people don't want to talk about because there's one demographic that's causing almost all the crime. It's not the Amish. It's not the Amish. And I think you can guess it's the demographic that tends to create all the crime in every city. What do you know? So I don't know exactly how they're going to do this unless they do the Israeli solution of ethnic cleansing, moving them all out, but that probably won't happen. So what Trump plans to do is to invoke the Home Rule Act, I think as they call it, and take over DC with federal troops. And to be fair, DC, they can't self-govern, obviously, if you see the people in the city. And so we need federal troops there to try to restore law and order. And let's just take a quick look at Trump. He gave a little briefing here.
Serious purpose, very serious purpose. Something's out of control, but we're going to put it in control very quickly like we did on the southern border. I'm announcing a historic action to rescue our nation's capital from crime, bloodshed, bedlam, and squalor, and worse. This is Liberation Day in DC, and we're going to take our capital back. We're taking it back. Under the authorities vested in me as the President of the United States, I'm officially invoking Section 740 of the District of Columbia Home Rule Act. You know what that is? And placing the DC Metropolitan Police Department under direct federal control. And you'll be meeting the people that will be directly involved with that.
So the people that were in charge of the police department, obviously, if you know the demographics in Washington, D.C., they can't really self-govern very well. I'll just leave it at that. And so Trump is trying to take this over. It's an embarrassment that our capital is so dangerous and so much squalor. And so Trump wants to clean it up. And part of this is to crack down on these criminals that do these crimes over and over. They get arrested, they get set free. That's going to stop. And the other thing is all the bums or so-called homeless. Trump saying, no, you can't have your tent cities here. You can't beg. You can't piss in the streets. We're going to provide you a place to go far from the Capitol. So you're going to have a place to stay, but you just can't camp on the street. That looks horrible. It's not hygienic. We don't want that. You don't have a right to do that.
Very good people, but they're tough. And they know what's happening, and they've done it before. In addition, I'm deploying the National Guard to help reestablish law, order, and public safety in Washington, D.C., and they're going to be allowed to do their job properly. And you people are victims of it, too. You know, you're reporters, and I understand a lot of you tend to be on the liberal side, but you don't want to get mugged and raped and shot and killed. And you all know people and friends of yours that happened. And so you can be anything you want, but you want to have safety in the streets. You want to be able to leave your apartment or your house where you live and feel safe and go into a store to buy a newspaper or buy something.
Yeah, that's the number one, by the way, purpose of government. That's how governments originally came together. We pay taxes to outsource basically our defense. So we don't have to take the law in our own hands. We hire someone that can do that. And people that are going to be lawbreakers and terrorize others, we hire police to catch them, apprehend them. Then we have judges, hopefully, that are our people. Many times they're not our people anymore and they hate us, but they're there to send these evil people in jail so they can't hurt us anymore.
And you don't have that now. The murder rate in Washington today is higher than that of Bogota, Colombia, Mexico City, some of the places that you hear about as being the worst places on earth, much higher. This is much higher. The number of car thefts has doubled over the past 5 years, and the number of carjackings has more than tripled. Murders in 2023 reached the highest rate probably ever. They say 25 years, but they don't know what that means because it just goes back 25 years. Can't be worse. Our capital city has been overtaken by violent gangs and bloodthirsty criminals.
Yeah. So Trump is saying enough's enough. And, this is going to be popular. People don't want to live around criminals. And Trump is calling the National Guard. And again, this is a difficult situation because part of this is how do you deal with this situation? Because a lot of this is demographic related, and a lot of the people are the problem. And here's some people talking about this here.
Some shots, some bangs. We've seen police officers running in all directions.
I almost feel a little desensitized to it in a way because it seems to be of the norm. It's actually pretty scary that these teenagers own guns and that they are in the neighborhood shooting guns.
And teenagers is a nice code word. Let's just say they're not white teenagers doing this. My family grew up, my father and grandfather, they all had guns, but they didn't participate. They didn't act like this. So the problem is the guns, is the people. And it's really crazy how much the left, because of their whole Black Lives Matter narrative, they want to keep really dangerous people out on the street. And here's this guy on Reddit. In Reddit's a very left-wing forum. And this guy says it's okay to want lower crime. And he's just saying it's horrible there. And you could be a liberal, but you don't want to get mugged or your car broken into or carjacked. And obviously he got shut down because they see this as a racist thing, because if they arrest the criminals in DC, pretty much everyone's going to be black, and they're going to have a problem with that. And as someone said, someone had a good point about the crime rate, and I just want to show you this. The funny thing about the American crime rates is that the crime rate is, in some very real sense, something like 100%, which is to say Americans avoid crime by treating it like it's an inevitable natural disaster, unresponsive to incentives, and completely unstoppable. But the simple fact is that I could have you go park your car and set 2 a.m. in certain parts of DC's or many other American cities. And the only question is how quickly you would be carjacked, not if. And that's a crime rate of 100%. And I agree with them. So you go in some areas, if you just stop your car, especially late at night, you may get away with it one night, but eventually you're going to get carjacked by criminals. That's almost guaranteed. And you should not have to live that way. Where I live, for example, everyone owns guns. I don't even lock my cars. It's a totally different, because the people are different than in DC. We don't have much of police around here. I don't even live in the city, so it's just a sheriff. And he's kind of like a good old boy type. And they don't patrol much or anything because people don't act that way. So in a place like DC, if you're going to have very savage people, you got to have National Guard. You got to keep them under control. You have to have curfews. It's sad, but that's the way the people are. And we can't tolerate this type of thing in the capital of our country. That is embarrassing. So that is the number 2 story. I had that initially as the number 1 story, but the Russian thing came up. All right, the number 3 story, we're still dropping white pills here. Supreme Court formally asked to overturn landmark same-sex marriage ruling. So this whole homosexuals getting married, which they can't. I mean, I know the law recognizes it now, but that's stupid because a marriage is between a man and a woman. It's just, I mean, you could say what it is. You know, you could call a rose something else, but by any other name is still a rose, right? So this needs to be overturned. I hope this does get overturned. It was a disaster. It makes a mockery of the whole sense of what marriage is, where a man and a woman, they create life, not creating disease. It's this is the bedrock of our civilization as a family. This was a horrible ruling, and we've seen the results because after this passed, what people predicted, you saw how it just became more and more degenerate, where all sorts of weird stuff, including child sex changes and drag queen story time hour. We got to reel this back in. So I hope the Supreme Court rules properly on that. And that'd be really good news if that happened. All right. Number 4 story in here is this had to do with Israel. Israel, they went ahead and they killed a bunch of journalists. An Al Jazeera correspondent. There was 5 journalists. They were in a tent, and the Israelis massacred them, and that's how they roll. And they didn't like, I guess, how they were reporting. So the Israeli method is to murder them. And I am sure, the usual people that are paid off by AIPAC are celebrating that. But it is just outrageous that something like that could happen. But sadly, it is. So Israel, they went ahead and murdered a bunch of journalists in Gaza. And that's where we are right now. All right. I'll say the number 5 story here is how corporations are having to change. And right here has Carnival now banned hip hop and rap music. So what they're trying to do is they want to change the clientele of Carnival, because Carnival, they got a certain demographic started to be on the ships. There started to be a lot of people, obese women throwing chairs at each other, screaming, fights. And so they're trying, people don't want to pay to go on a cruise to, feel like you're in Somalia or something like that, in a war zone, in the ghetto. So Carnival Cruise is doing everything they can to try to discourage, let's just say, the ghetto element from getting on the cruises. And they're limiting the amount of drinks, or they're getting rid of hip hop music. I think what they should do is just play classical music. That would repel a lot of them. Maybe provide a lot of books. That would work too. So it's sad we have to do it this way, but they have to do proxies to ban certain people or discourage certain people that are invariably going to cause a lot of trouble, because it's nothing wrong with being on a cruise, having some drinks and having fun. But there's a certain group that they can't just have regular fun. It's always got to turn into violence, screaming, throwing chairs over and over and over. And when you have that situation, people don't want to go on a cruise then. And then those type of people are type of people that kind of trash the ship anyway. So they're doing various things to discourage the elements here. All right. So I'm just going to do a recap on the news. The number 1 story was, again, it looks like the Ukrainian army, at least in the Donbass, there was a Russian breakthrough that's been confirmed by both sides. And it doesn't look like the Ukrainians have reserves to plug that hole, which is a big problem, to say the least. And this is right before the summit on Friday. Number 2 big story was Trump is cracking down on lawlessness in DC. They're taking over the police department in DC because the people in DC can't control it. And they're calling out the National Guard. Number 3 big story is the Supreme Court is going to relook at this same-sex so-called marriage and see if that's constitutional, or that should be up to the states. That should be interesting. Number 4 story was 5 journalists were attacked by the Israelis, and the usual people that are AIPAC funded were saying, well, they deserved it because they're telling stories we don't like. And number 5 was Carnival Cruise. They're going to try to ban rap music and hip hop to try to clean up the clientele that have been infesting their ships. So those are the big 5 news stories of the day. And as always, guys, thank you for being here. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.